Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today on the show, we have Tamara Goldberg. She is an internal medicine physician, and she wrote the KevinMD article, The Duality of Being a Physician Mom in the Age of COVID-19. Tamara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
So we'll get to the article in a bit, but first off, if you could share your story and your journey to where you are today, that'd be great.
Sure. So I am currently the director of the primary care track at Mount Sinai Morningside West Internal Medicine Residency here in New York City. I grew up in Connecticut, did my undergraduate training there, spent a few years traveling abroad, and came back to Connecticut for medical school, Philadelphia for internal medicine residency training, and I've been in New York now 10 plus years as a clinician educator.
Wonderful. And how is the pandemic affecting you and your practice?
Yeah, so, in many ways, like all of us, the pandemic has really shifted how we are practicing our roles within medicine. As I mentioned, I'm a clinician educator, so much of the work in New York City, many of us were redeployed. We're now back in our outpatient practices, and it's seemingly a new normal, but I would say there's still an air of uncertainty about what's coming next for us in New York City.
So let's get into your KevinMD article, The Duality of Being a Physician Mom in the Age of COVID-19. Now, can you walk my audience through that article for those who haven't read it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Sure. This article is really about, stems from my own personal experience as a physician mother. And it was really in response to the very early stages of COVID in New York City in mid-March is when I wrote the article. And at that time, we were in survival mode. There was a great deal of uncertainty. And I remember within a matter of days, those of us in the outpatient world were redeployed, schools were closed. And so it felt very overwhelming as a physician mother, as someone who takes my work very seriously. I wondered, how am I going to do this? How am I going to balance work and childcare? Will my husband be able to work from home? What about the safety of my children? How will I support my residents during this time? So I would say this article really stemmed from my personal experience of uncertainty and overwhelmment at that time. Then having talked with my colleagues, you begin to realize, oh, not just you. And I think one of the best parts about the article was the feedback I received from folks across the country saying, thank you for giving me a voice. It was really quite rewarding to be able to do that.
So let's get into more detail. So what are some of the non-clinical obstacles that you were facing during that time, or you may be facing now?
Yeah, I think I'll speak on behalf of many women physicians who are parents as well when I say this, but studies have shown female physicians take on a huge amount of the caregiving burden and domestic responsibilities compared to their male peers. And, there was a study that came out in JAMA last year that looked at a physician cohort from multiple different specialties. And they were interested in the work hours of physicians early in their career. And what they found was that 30% of physician mothers within the first 6 years of their being an attending reduced their work hours compared to 5% of their male colleagues who are parents. And this has significant implications, as you can imagine. This will affect your compensation, your potential for leadership positions within an institution, promotion. And so we're really looking at potentially an even wider gender disparity for physician parents as we move through the course of this pandemic.
Now, I have a lot of administrators and policy experts who listen to this podcast. Now, what are some of the things that they can do to address this issue?
That's a great question. And, I'll start by saying I think so much of the gender equity and medicine movement over the last few years has been focused on sort of the lean in era type mentality where to fix part of the gender equity issue, fix the individual themselves, learn how to become a better negotiator, learn how to become more of an effective leader. And these are really important skills, but we found they're insufficient. What we really need to be doing is asking, how can our systems better support female physician parents and retain us. And again, I think it's sad that we're losing women physicians in much greater number than their male peers and at such early stages in their career. So some of the solutions I think we're looking at, obviously the childcare crisis, we did not know in the beginning of this pandemic the duration. And we're now looking at a school year in which some schools may be closed, part-time. How are we going to better support female physician parenting during this time? And many institutions set up sort of temporary childcare options for staff and physicians during peak pandemic periods. Well, how can we convert those to more long-standing employer-sponsored childcare options? That's a big one. I think in terms of promotion and tenure committees, we need to rethink what are the metrics we're using to evaluate physicians during this time period? Can we really rely on the same productivity measures that we relied on historically? What are the sacrifices physicians have had to make in terms of research, teaching, service during this time? So those are two of the ways I think we can really address the structural inequities.
Excellent. That's all well said. Over the course of the pandemic and during the course of my podcast, I've talked to so many physician mothers and physician parents. I'm a physician parent myself. I have two daughters. One is just entering a sophomore in high school. Now, can you share any advice over the last few months during the pandemic that you could share with other physician parents?
Yeah, I've learned over the years, be cautious with your advice. Everyone's going through different things at different times. But one thing that has really helped me during this period is to reach out and nurture the relationships with other women colleagues in similar positions. And I know there's a lot of talk about mentorship and sponsorship for women in medicine. I would say really reach out to those same level relationships. They matter a great deal in terms of support, and whether it's just to sort of vent and commiserate, or whether it's to really think more proactively about how we can improve our system. I think it's been a huge source of support, because the reality is, it's going to be tough times ahead.
We're talking to Tamara Goldberg. She's an internal medicine physician, and she wrote the KevinMD article, The Duality of Being a Physician Mom in the Age of COVID-19. Tamara, what's something that you know now that you wish you knew back before the pandemic started?
I think the duration, when it started, again, I think we were in survival mode, and it was almost like adrenaline was keeping us going. And I think there's a real fatigue now, and obviously not just among physicians, among folks everywhere. How do we sustain this? And how do we continue to function in all parts of our life despite these unprecedented circumstances?
And my final question, do you have a take-home message that you want to share with the KevinMD audience?
That's a great question. I would say get involved in your institution. I think one thing the Black Lives Matter movement has done very effectively is to cause us to examine the structures in which we operate day to day that continue to perpetuate inequities. And so I would say, look at your own institution and what are ways that you can voice solutions to these longstanding problems, and how can you get involved? And I know it's a crazy time for everyone, but working together is, I think, what's going to get us through this and ultimately make change for the better.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insight, and thank you for being on the show.
It was so much fun. Thanks, Kevin.